I'm honored to have been chosen to deliver the 2011 Plummer Lecture. I know this is one of the ways we honor Fred L. Plummer and his incredible service to the society and to our industry. Thanks to the American Welding Society and Ed Norman, thanks Ed, for their consideration and the privilege to address you today. It's a humbling experience for me to be here and to have been chosen to deliver the 2011 Plummer Memorial Education Lecture. My lecture will be a little different probably than those you've heard the past 10 years. I looked at those topics and took a look at everything from the latest equipment and technique in welding industry to process and so forth. But mine will be a little different, and this is why. This year, the organization Manpower Group completed their 2011 Global Talent Survey, and they found, as they looked at the gauge of the impact of talent shortages on the global market, that there truly are shortages worldwide. The global talent skilled worker shortage is rising, and the percentage of employers having difficulty filling jobs due to the lack of available talent is rising. So even in this tough economy, the fact is clear. The top 10 jobs in the Manpower survey that employers around the world, 40,000 employers around the world were surveyed. The shortages they're finding are in technicians, sales representatives, skilled trade workers, and engineers. And this is the 5th year in a row that these jobs have topped that list. But guess what? The top issue is not necessarily technical talent. The top issue that these employers cited was the inadequate basic employability skills, things like attendance, time management, and work ethic. In the National Association of Manufacturers, they conducted a skills gap report in 2001, again in 2011, and these reports conducted by NAM's Manufacturing Institute almost perfectly mirror the Manpower study. So, talent shortage. In fact, we had an article released in Parade magazine over Labor Day Sunday, and Parade cited 450,000 jobs going unfilled worldwide because of this talent gap. And that issue on employability skills is what employers are really struggling with. So finding talent to fill the 21st century pipeline, a lot of the problem lies in the area of people with the lack of basic employability skills. Now, my organization, Skills USA, promotes high-level technical skills. In fact, we hold our annual championships. So many of you in this room have been involved in that. It's a series of 94 competitive events nationally. It takes 10,000 local, regional, and state competitions for a student to get to the national level. And these competitions range from welding to robotics, from culinary arts to carpentry, from graphic design to hairdressing. So we're really hitting most every occupational cluster in this country with the competition that we have. And the list goes on. But we enjoy partnerships with over 1,000 corporations, labor and trade associations, and they invest over $35 million annually in this national competition. It takes over 16 football fields of floor space, and the main day of this event, which we held this past summer and will hold again this summer during the last week of June in Kansas City, is estimated to be the largest single day of corporate volunteerism anywhere in America. So thousands of volunteers come together to judge our students against industry standards. And these industry standards are set by the people from the industry, from the American Welding Society, from Miller, Lincoln, the list goes on and on. One of our finest welding committees is, of course, our welding committee. Top experts in workforce training from all across America. But our welding committee sets standards high, they set the bar high. In fact, they've set it so high that for the past several years, our students are doing very, very well. Our welding students who win the national championship in Kansas City are doing very well in international competition. We've won consistently gold, silver, and bronze medals, competing against 55 countries from around the world. And just last month, our Team USA welding student, Brad Klink from Washtenaw Community College, sitting right here, won the silver medal in the world. Let's give him a hand. But Brad won that medal in London. What were you, Brad, 4 points away from gold? Yes. Very, very close, and you made us proud. You made us proud to be there in London with you and with the team representing the United States of America against the 55 other nations. And Brad is one of those people in a long line of welding students who've brought home medals in the World Skills Competition. Ed Bonert is here today. Ed was one of our experts. Thank you, Ed, for all your support in making that possible for the students that came before Brad to succeed in international competition. So this industry stands behind our students. They stand behind education. And we appreciate all that the AWS and this industry does to help our kids. But please understand that Skills USA is more than a skills contest. Above all else, Skills USA is a leadership and character development organization. That's really our core. And our expertise lies in training students in those basic employability skills that the Manpower Group study and the NAM study talked about. Exactly those skills. We do our best to make sure that our students have the opportunity to become well-rounded, not only with the highest level of technical skills, but as future employees, leaders, and good citizens. So my topic today is not so much about welding, it's about these employability skills that employers are having such a difficult time with. It's the stuff that enhances the technical skills and helps to make a person successful on the job, in their community, and in life. So let's talk about leadership and why it's so important and so critical to this industry's future, to the future of our workforce, and to the future of our nation. So how does one become a leader? In Skills USA, we ask that question every day. Is it a position you plan for? Or are some people simply destined to be leaders? Are they born that way? And it's something I've always wondered. I'm honored and humbled that my work has impacted hundreds of thousands of people annually. I've spoken to groups as small as 20 in a single classroom and to as many as 15,000 in a major arena. I've conducted leadership training for young people and strategic planning for adults who lead nonprofit organizations all across America. And I've worked with team building exercises on challenge courses to help a team get up a hill, as well as worked with congressional leaders on Capitol Hill. Recently, I was identified as a center of influence by a military general, although I've never had the honor of serving in the military. I've traveled to 49 of the 50 United States, 2 U.S. territories, and 7 foreign countries. And I've worked with education and government leaders in all of them. I recently met the President of the United States, and he shook my hand and said, "Thanks for a good job." Just 2 Friday nights ago, I had dinner with the President of Toyota at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. And last week, I had lunch with the President, Chairman, and CEO of Air Products in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And once again this year, I've been privileged to meet and get to know the President of the American Welding Society, as well as former presidents like Victor. Where are you, Victor? Thank you, Victor. So for a kid who grew up in Appalachia, in southern West Virginia, in the coal fields, I've been blessed with some pretty amazing opportunities. So the topic of my lecture today is welding education, changing lives, and building a 21st century workforce. But my lecture is about life lessons learned, the lessons I've learned in life about leadership, about leading others, working with others, building teams, and it all started in the welding industry. I know I'm speaking to some incredible leaders in this room, and everyone here has a different story about how you rose to the position you're in today. They're all different, but I'm sure there are lots of parallels if you talk with one another about how you rose to the position you're in. So how did a leadership journey like mine begin, and what were the key milestones along the way? My journey began with career and technical education. Back in 1967, it was called vocational education. And as a teenager, what I wanted to do was build stuff. I wanted to be a part of manufacturing. I wanted to see a process come to life. I wanted to work with fabrication, putting things together, making a product real. And I chose welding in the 11th grade in high school in southern West Virginia, and that made my decision real in education, in real life, and really relevant to my educational goals. So in 1967, I entered a welding program in Mercer County, West Virginia. There was an instructor there by the name of Joseph Picarella. He was an old Newport News shipbuilding welder. And he became probably the most powerful mentor in my life, other than my parents and grandparents and my family. So Joe encouraged us every day, inspired us every day to do our best. And he taught primarily 60-10. And he taught the old whip. That's what he liked to teach. And we trained 2 years on 6010 electrode. And in 1969, I was doing pretty well in the class. The second, 67, 68, 68, 69 were the 2 school years I was enrolled in that program. And Joe decided to have a local, then VICA competition, now called Skills USA. VICA was only 2 years old. Skills USA's, VICA became Skills USA in 2001, so we've only had this new name for a few years. But in the VICA competition, we had a local runoff, and I won that competition. And Brad, I could have never done what you did in London, and I honor you for that, because you're better than I was ever, even in industry. But I took the challenge. I won that local competition, and Joe and I traveled on a Saturday morning in April 1969 over to a little town called Welch, West Virginia. Anyone ever seen the movie October Sky? That's where Welch is, and that's where I grew up on the mountain across the county from Welch. So we went into a welding lab at the McDowell County Vocational Technical Center, and we were given our challenge. And that day, although I got to use my 6010, they handed me a 1/4 inch 7024, which was about this long. And I'd never seen one before. I'd never worked with anything that required that much amperage, so I didn't know what to do with it. Thinking back, Brad, I would have cranked that machine up. It was an old Lincoln 225 crank on the front, AC/DC machine, and I would have cranked it up to maximum, and I would have laid that rod, that weld in there, but it didn't happen that way. My weld looked like bubble gum when it was finished. So that 7024 was the death of me in that competition. But even though I didn't win the gold, silver, or bronze that day, I won a real golden experience. In fact, that day changed my life as a young person. I was almost 17 years old. When I walked into that room, the mayor of Welch was there to shake my hand and say congratulations. People were there from the Hobart School of Welding Technology to offer scholarships. Guess what? I didn't win one. But the people from the West Virginia Department of Education were there to say congratulations. Congratulations on your skill. Congratulations on being here. And there were judges there from business and industry. And I'll never forget, and Brad, you know this because your inside of your helmet becomes a rear view mirror to watch what's happening behind you. And I kept seeing these guys behind me with clipboards, and sort of freaked me out as a 17-year-old. But I did my best. But what I learned was that those people behind me in my rearview mirror were experts from the welding industry who were judging my work, evaluating everything I was doing that day. So when I walked away from that day of competition, something clicked in a young man's mind. And basically it was this: if what I'm doing with my hands and my mind is not important, why would all these people be here to support me? And there was a grand dinner that evening with shrimp that I'd never seen before. We didn't get much shrimp in West Virginia in 1969. But it was just a celebration of all the students there from across the state, and it truly changed my life at an early age. I went on to go directly into the manufacturing industry, building underground coal mining equipment, building battery-operated coal mining equipment in the early 70s that would and still to this day, with battery technology, go underground and run an 8-hour shift on a set of batteries in a tray running a small DC motor that powers equipment that would push its way through a mountain. So the technology existed then. We were working with some really high battery technology in those days, and I went into that industry as a welder, building underground, basically coal cars, then moving up to building the tractors that actually moved the material. We diversified into American LaFrance fire engines, which was a thrill. It was all stainless steel, all handmade cabs, tanks, ladders, and we finally diversified because the coal industry was starting to move downhill, diversified into building construction equipment for the military. So I had some great experiences there, but I worked my way through that process in that manufacturing company from a line welder to doing U.S. Bureau of Mines permissible welding on vessels that had to be not only watertight but gas tight, because the methane cannot get into the atmosphere inside the coal mine or you'll blow people up. But moving from that into management, becoming a supervisor of several hundred people, running all 3 shifts in that company, and just growing as a young man. At the same time, continue my education, because my ultimate job was to be Joseph Piccarella, was to go back and teach and teach welding. So I continued my education at Virginia Tech, graduated with a degree in administration and training from James Madison University, and became a teacher in 1978, a welding teacher. And to this day, the most inspiring and best job I've ever held, because I got to work with young people every day. From there, moved in from teaching, taught for almost 10 years, moved up to the Virginia Department of Education as an administrator, supervising welding and metal trades programs, but also running the Skills USA program in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We had 17,000 students involved in Skills USA during those times, and it was a great, great experience. So in 2000, it was actually in 1996, I left the Virginia Department of Education, came up to Leesburg, Virginia to manage the business and industry partnerships for Skills USA, where I got to work with these 1,000 companies that we deal with competition, other companies that help us with curriculum development, got to work with the World Skills Competition and the international team, work with our alumni program. Anybody here other than Brad and myself, former members of the organization? Ernest, you were. Yeah, every time I ask that question, at least a third of the audience hands go up. You know, we've served 10.3 million students in the past 47 years. I'm so proud that I was one of them. And every trade show I attend, I ask that question, and I see several hands go up because we've got a lot of alumni out there. If you were a member and you haven't joined alumni, go online, skillsusa.org. It's free, and we'd love to know who you are, when you were a member, and what you're doing now. So our database of 10.3 million, we've just started collecting that data a few years ago. We've only got about 30,000 former students in the database right now, and we need to really grow that. Our employers are insisting that we grow that because they want to hire students like Brad who've come through these programs. And Brad, before I move on to the next part of this presentation, I want to thank you for representing our nation so well. Seeing you carry the American flag across the stage in London was a thrill for me. In fact, I ran down and handed you a flag to carry on stage when the award was announced. But Brad represented us so well, along with the 16 other students that traveled to London. We competed in everything from bricklaying to beauty therapy to culinary arts, and we were proud of every one of our kids. But Brad, we're extremely proud of you and know you have a great future, headed to be a welding engineer, right? Make sure you talk to Ernest back there. But we all know that starting with my story, that life was filled with choices. I had choices all along the way. One of those choices was what to do with my education. We hit forks in the road in life, and they begin at an early age. Which way we decide to go on those forks has everything to do with how our lives, our families, and our communities turn out, for good or for bad. Working with youth, I'm constantly reminded of how young people make choices. And we've all been there. Whether with our own kids or students we may have the privilege of working with and train, as in my organization says, and mold into world-class workers and responsible American citizens and leaders, we all know that peer pressure is a factor that young people struggle with. And it doesn't stop with youth. It happens throughout life. Every human feels the need to belong. We all want to belong to something. And each of us will absolutely belong to something. And that's why you're here today attending this show. You're involved in this industry and probably belong to the American Welding Society. But during those teenage years, we're looking for a connection. And we will find a connection. It's absolutely critical that we keep young people focused on going in the right direction. Kids are going to hit that fork in the road. They all do. And they're going to decide whether to join a positive organization like Skills USA, or the student chapter of the American Welding Society, or the hundreds of other youth organizations that are out there for them, or they're going to decide to go in a different direction. Peer pressure is going to have a huge influence there. If a kid decides to hang out with a positive crowd, they're going to join these organizations we talked about. If they choose the other crowd, the connection they make, and they will make a connection, may lead to dropping out of school, may lead to drugs, crime, gangs. They may join a gang versus joining Skills USA, alcohol, whatever it might be. But it's a choice we've all faced. And sometimes we face it several times during life. So if there's one important thing I can say to you today, I encourage you to get involved with youth, if you aren't already, and help steer them in the right direction. Our schools and our communities and our nation really depend on it. So when I hit that fork in the road in high school, I chose career and technical education and welding as my pathway. I found a connection to something I loved, and I discovered that I had a strength. I had a real strength in this occupational training area. I'd never been the best math student, but welding helped me understand the relevancy of math and science and so many other academic subjects that it seemed so intangible, really intangible to me as a young person throughout my educational experience. So suddenly, at 16, the light came on, and I never looked back. I really found my strength. And I truly believe that finding your strength is a huge factor in becoming a leader, something we really try to emphasize to our students. And a quick story about strengths. There was a young man named Brent. He'd been born with a challenge. He'd been born without a left arm. His parents had always encouraged him to participate with the other kids in anything he wanted to try. And he'd tried some things that his parents felt comfortable with. He'd become a really good soccer player. And he felt good on the field because his handicap was really not much of a factor in soccer. But at 13 years old, Brent decided that he wanted to learn and compete in judo, the martial arts. His parents weren't so sure this was a good idea, and they feared he'd be at such a disadvantage he may even get hurt, may get seriously hurt. But Brent insisted, and since his parents had always encouraged him to try anything that he wanted, they agreed and they enrolled him in a local martial arts program, and he started at his dojo with his first class. And Brent took this very seriously. And he told his sensei on the very first day of class, I want to compete, not just learn, I want to compete. So the trainer agreed, and he started with the basics. But he wanted to work with Brent to teach him one really important move. So he worked on this move every day, over and over again. And for a year, the sensei worked with Brent to master this move. Now Brent looked around and he saw all the kids were learning other things. And the other students were learning multiple moves, and he was feeling a little left behind. So he went to his instructor and asked, he said, Sensei, why am I learning only this one move when all the other kids are learning so much more? And the sensei looked Brent directly in the eye and said, trust me, I know what I'm doing. I'm taking you down the correct path. So Brent accepted his advice and worked even harder until the sensei decided that he had mastered this move. So now it was time for competition. He entered a tournament, his very first one. He faced his first opponent, and he actually won the match. He moved through the brackets and made it to the semifinal round, and he won there too. He was now in the finals and facing a well-known former champion. His sensei sent him to the mat and said, keep working your move, Brent. That's your strength. Trust me. He did, and Brent won the final match and became the new judo champion. So after Brent got his gold medal, he sat down with the sensei and reflected on the match and the training that he'd been given. He said, Sensei, I trusted you, even though I was not sure why we worked so hard to train on that one move. But it sure paid off. Why did you train me that way when everyone else was receiving such a different regimen of training? Again, his sensei looked the young man directly in the eye and said, Brent, you found your strength, and you mastered the move. That's why you won the championship. However, I must now tell you that I also knew all along the way, I knew that there's only one known defense for that move. The only way your opponent can defend against that move is by grabbing you and taking you down by your left arm. So, sometimes our strengths come from places that are unexpected. And that was a great lesson for Brent. But good leaders know that capitalizing on strengths versus remediating weaknesses is a proven method of making people successful. One of the best training exercises I've ever gone through in my life, and you've probably heard of the organization called Gallup, G-A-L-L-U-P. The Gallup organization is responsible for the Gallup poll. They do a lot of surveying worldwide on everything from social trends to workplace trends. And you hear the reports on CNN and across the news media constantly. But I had a class actually at Gallup University in Nebraska called Finding Your Strengths. And there's a book called, it's called Now Discover Your Strengths, and the exercise inside the book is called the Strength Finder. If you haven't read that book, I encourage you to get it. I encourage you to take the assessment at the end, which is called the Strengths Finder, and it's online, it's very quick, rapid-paced. You only have a few minutes to answer the question, so it gets your first impression, but it actually identifies your top 10 strengths. And it's an excellent exercise. So discovering strengths, we know that everyone has them. And sometimes we place people as leaders, we place people in positions where they're not capitalizing on their strengths. We're trying to remediate their weaknesses, improve on what they're weak in instead of capitalizing and using them where their strengths lie. So strengths are important. But my experiences in life have certainly led me to a position of national leadership. But if you'd asked me at an early age if I planned to be in such a leadership position and standing before you here today, I would have said absolutely not. That's not my plan. It would have been no. It's not what I had in mind when I entered higher education. It wasn't what I had in mind when I entered the workforce. But I realized that as life happens, we're all faced with constant opportunities to step up, to help other people, help people grow, and become a leader. And it certainly doesn't happen overnight. I recently talked with another CEO of one of the world's leading online companies, and he said that it took him 13 years to become an overnight success. Well, it's taken me 35 years, and I can say it's truly been fulfilling every step of the way. From that first welding class, to that manufacturing experience, to teaching, which was just an amazing experience, to now being an administrator of a national organization. It's been a fulfilling experience and a great road that I've traveled. But for those that choose to lead, we all know there'll be challenges. But there'll also be a lot of perfect moments filled with excitement and wonder. And I believe a leader measures success by looking back to see how many people they've lifted up. How many people has your work lifted up? And I know everyone in this room has done that. It's really never about the leader, but about those who've been inspired by their work and their actions. Leadership capability grows as life lessons are learned. I found that along the way in life, many times we pick up nuggets, just tiny nuggets, very simple philosophies, ideas, or strategies that immediately make sense to us and can be implemented quickly. I call it the Friday-Monday rule. If I can learn something on Friday and implement it on Monday, then I'm excited. But these things kind of fit into our mindset. If we grab a nugget that we can really feel comfortable with and we can really feel good about sharing with others. So I'm going to share some lessons I've learned and also share the stories of a few other people that I've met along my life's journey and some of the leadership lessons that I've learned. And again, knowing that these leadership lessons are to be passed on, and we try to pass them on to our youth in our program, and I hope you'll be able to pass some of these along as well. And they'll help you on your journey of leadership and of service. So some of the favorite quotes that I'm using will have a short story. Others is just nuggets that make sense, and I felt them important enough to use. My first nugget has been my really the number one rule that I've used throughout my life as far as leadership. And that is that you always lead or manage by inspiration and never by intimidation. As a leader, personally, do you inspire or do you intimidate? And this is a life story that's been my basic philosophy from day one. I believe there are really only two styles of leadership: inspiration and intimidation. And we've all had that intimidator in our life. And I believe that these kinds of leaders can be successful in the short term. We've all had at least one teacher or boss or professor or group leader that we feared, just really feared, because their leadership style was threatening. So you remember how these leaders had an air about them. They forced us to perform because we simply were afraid of the consequences if we didn't. Whether we feared a bad grade or discipline, being humiliated or embarrassed by this leader, or even losing our job, position, or a chance for a promotion, there was fear that caused us to perform. We knew we better walk the line for this person. So I've observed several people, several leaders who've employed this style and found that they can create short-term productivity and they can create some success. However, what happens behind the scenes and behind the back of this type of leader is usually not really pretty. Those being led are constantly looking for ways to resist this leadership style. Usually it's through non-performance, or at least poor performance or production. I've actually seen work slow and production fall as people pretended to be on task, but were intentionally underperforming because morale had dropped to such a low point and people were so unhappy, they were finding their own ways to resist this leader. Again, after short-term success, this kind of leader eventually fails and is forced to move on to another position or maybe even another organization because the achievement of his or her team has faltered. And then we all remember a teacher we loved, or a supervisor we really enjoyed working for, or a class we couldn't wait to get to, and how it left us sad when we knew that class or that program was about to end. Why? Because the leader of this class, project or job, was about one thing. It was about lifting up people and never tearing them down. During a time in my 20s, I told you I worked in manufacturing and working for that company. This was in the coal boom of the 70s. And we were hiring as fast as we could get people online. We were pushing product out the door at a rapid pace. We were working 3 shifts, 24/7, 364 days a year. The only day we were closing that plant was Christmas Day. But I'd been promoted to be the supervisor for several hundred employees in welding, fabrication, steel inventory, machining, and the assembly line of this company. So I had at a young age, I had a pretty tough responsibility. And I knew that the supervisor I was replacing, he had been an intimidator. I actually worked for him. And coming into this new position, I knew that morale was extremely low because of the intimidation factor of this supervisor. And through my life, my educational and family experiences, I knew a little bit in my 20s about effective leadership by inspiration. My dad taught me that. My welding instructor had taught me that. Our production by this team in this manufacturing facility was down. It was really way down. We were behind on orders and parts to keep production moving. In fact, we were behind by months in production. We were being chastised a little because the production line ahead of us was waiting on us. But I knew it was my responsibility to do my best to bring morale back, and I believed that if I could, that production would follow. And my approach was very simple. Every morning I said hello, and I said good morning to every employee on my team. It took most of the morning to do that. I also took just a few minutes to ask how they were doing, ask about their families, about their work. And throughout my day, every day, I would ask them to tell me a little bit about what they were working on, what kind of challenges they had, if they needed anything from me to make things better, whether it was supplies, an improvement in the physical working environment, or a discussion about the equipment they were operating. I took a serious interest in their work and in their well-being. A very, very simple thing, just actually talking with people every day and asking how they were doing. And change slowly did start to come. After a month, parts and production saw a marked improvement. And by the end of 6 months, something really remarkable had happened. No longer were we behind on production. In fact, there were so many parts being produced that we had to store them in the parking lot outdoors because the storage facility inside was overflowing. We had to store the surplus actually outside in the parking lot. So caring about people and providing an inspired team can make a tremendous difference and can happen very quickly. It did in this case. In 6 months, we turned that production line around. So in this simple but effective approach, I realized that we really can't motivate other people. Motivation comes from within each individual. However, I had learned that we can inspire others by modeling through our own personal and positive actions. These actions are based on a very simple tenet. Treat those you lead the way you'd like to be treated. It goes back to the golden rule that we all grew up with, and this rule is really timeless. People want to be treated with respect, and the leader who understands that also commands respect. No one truly wants to be unhappy in school, on the job, or in life. The basic nature of every human being is centered around success, being recognized for the good work that they do. Leadership is really about leading by lifting people up and never tearing them down. And even disciplinary action can be approached in a constructive way. Everyone makes mistakes, and we all need some constructive criticism from time to time. It does help us learn and grow. Bottom line, the best leaders never forget that leadership is about how we make our team feel. Do your team members feel respected, connected to the leader, and motivated from within? Do they appreciate that every task is important to the customer? And if we collectively do our jobs, we'll make a positive difference in the lives of those that we serve. And it doesn't matter whether you're manufacturing metal parts or you're serving an IT function, whatever you're managing, that's always true. So can we make a positive difference in the lives we serve if the leader understands the basic principles of lifting up people and positive reinforcement? They will. That was my first nugget. Managed by inspiration, never by intimidation. The second nugget comes from a gentleman that I knew. He's deceased now, from the automotive industry. He was an executive at General Motors. His name was Don Gray. He led an organization called the Automotive Youth Educational Systems. Still exists today, and it's based on the European apprenticeship model of getting students into an apprenticeship program in high school and moving into dealerships and into the workforce in the automotive industry, actually going on the job with the equivalent of a couple years technician experience. But Don had something that he would say that I remembered and still remember to this day. And this was his quote: "The difference between acceptable and exceptional is attention to detail." Listen to that again. The difference between acceptable and exceptional is attention to detail. Don believed that. He lived it each and every day. He watched every detail of the operation. He became very successful and lifted up a lot of young people because of that philosophy. I have that quote framed on my wall, and it's behind my computer monitor where I can see it every day when I sit down. Because being thorough and paying attention to detail is a key ingredient, a really key ingredient in everything that we do. So paying attention to detail is nugget number 2. Nugget number 3, anyone watch the Packers last night? Yeah. Destroy the Vikings? That was rough if you were a Vikings fan. But you remember, you probably saw, if you watched the game last night, you saw the Vince Lombardi name and his tenure in the 50s on the wall in the stadium. And Vince Lombardi said something that's always been inspirational to me. He would tell his team, "We will strive for perfection in hopes of attaining excellence." So a good leader lets their team know they'll never be perfect. None of us are ever perfect, but we can certainly be excellent. So Vince Lombardi said, "We will strive for perfection in hopes of attaining excellence." And you know the kind of record he had as a football coach with the Packers. That's nugget number 3. Nugget number 4 is there's power in recognition. Praise is really important to people. Praise is one of the most important things that we all live for. So my lesson here is, say these 2 words in any way you possibly can. And those 2 words are good job. Just saying good job to someone as you pass, to look at their work, to help inspire them to keep moving forward, is something that really works. You might say something like, "Nice work. You must have spent a lot of time on that." Or just, "Great job. Keep up the good work." Or "Looking good." It doesn't matter what you say, but as long as you're acknowledging that their work is going forward and they're doing a good job, will make a big difference to that person. There are hundreds of other ways to say good job. Job well done. They're all important. So when you give just a few simple words of praise, you're also saying to your team members another 2 words. You're saying thank you. And you're acknowledging their value to the team and to your organization's mission. It's very simple and very easy to do. Nugget number 5. One of the most important leadership lessons of all. It involves picking ourselves back up when we struggle. And we all do. You've probably heard the story of WD-40. There was a group of rocket scientists in San Diego back in the 50s that invented this compound called WD-40. WD stands for water displacement, and 40 was? Took 40 tries to make it right. It took 39 failures before they hit it and got the formula right. And we know what WD-40 is now. One of my favorite movies of all time is Batman Begins, and I use this with students constantly. Every time I stand in front of a group of students, I'll tell this story. If you remember in the movie, young Bruce Wayne, who later became Batman as a child, was running through the gardens at stately Wayne Manor, where he and his family lived. He was running through the courtyard, through the garden with his girlfriend, and he tripped and fell down this hole. And that hole was a cave underground, and when he fell into the hole, millions of bats swarmed around him. Of course, this later became the Bat Cave, and that's what made him really cool. But he was terrified as a young man. And the butler and his father pulled him back up to safety, and he was lying on the sidewalk, sort of recovering from his shock. And his dad asked young Bruce, "Why do we fall?" And Bruce didn't answer. But his dad said, "We fall to pick ourselves back up again." And there's a real lesson there for anyone who goes through life. We all have failures, and particularly young people struggle with failure. In fact, I told this story back in September to a group of young people in Washington, D.C. at our Washington Leadership Training Institute. And I'll tell you in a moment what the response from a student was. But I'll tell them that, you know, we're all going to fall. We're going to fall maybe in finance, maybe we're going to fall on the job, maybe we're going to fall in a personal relationship, but we're all going to fall somewhere along the way. Again, like Vince Lombardi said, no one's perfect. But when you fall, the lesson is to pick yourself back up again, dust yourself off, and move forward. And people have to understand that every morning in the East, something magical happens. The sun comes up and it shines on that side of the world, wherever we are, when the sun rises. And I'll tell young people that if you'll just give that issue, that failure, whatever you think that failure might be, some time, at least give it till the next morning and let the sun shine on your face again, things are going to be better. Because the sun, by power greater than ours, is going to rise, and it's going to be there, whether you are or not. Because you see young people, many young people struggle with family life, with relationships, with school, with grades, with work, and they actually consider doing harm to themselves. And I always, and every chance that I have when I talk to a group of young people, I say, if you ever think of doing something, doing harm to yourself or to someone else, just promise me you'll do one thing. Wait. Wait until the next morning. Watch the sunrise. Things will be better. It's always darker just before the dawn. And you have to let the sun shine on your face again, because things will get better. So I had a young man come to me in September after I told that very story to a group of about 300 kids. He pulled me aside at the end and he said, "Thanks. I was actually contemplating suicide. I've gone to too many services for young people that have died in car accidents, a couple that have committed suicide, one that actually happened during our national conference in Kansas City. A kid went off a 12th floor balcony at the Westin, Kansas City, to his death. He was upset with something in his life. We weren't quite sure what, but it happens. So anytime you have an opportunity to talk to a young person and encourage them in any way you can and lift them up, it's going to help them. So failure is there. It's going to happen to us. It's always important to pick ourselves back up again, like the Batman movie tells us. The other good quote in that movie was another one that when Batman had when Bruce Wayne had grown up to be Batman. If you remember, Katie Holmes in that movie was the babe, and I think it was the Green Goblin had tossed her off a high-rise building in Gotham City, and she was falling to her demise. And Batman swoops down with his giant bat wings and scoops her up with his trick belt and pulls her to the top of the building. And she's laying across the building on a ledge, and she comes to realize that he's hovering above her, and she looks up at him and she says, "Who are you?" And he looked down and he said, "It's not who we are, but what we do that defines us." And that is so true. And young people need to realize that. It doesn't matter who you are, what color you are, what your financial standing is, who your family is, where you're from, where you live, what your house looks like, what kind of shoes you're wearing. It's what you do that defines you. So it's not who we are, but what we do. And that's another basic rule of leadership. So, I know that many of you have risen to the top in your training field. You have a lot to give and a lot to share. As you move through your professional career, I do want to ask you one favor, maybe one final career move. And I know some of you in this room are already doing it. But young people, and older ones too, are eager to gain the knowledge and skill that you have. And I know you're carrying the torch now, and you do pass that knowledge along. But the skill you've accumulated during your career, I encourage you to consider teaching. Consider being a teacher, part-time or full-time, adjunct, at night, whenever you can. Try to give back to the next generation. It's critical. I know you can and will make a difference for tomorrow's leaders in the 21st century workforce, because those who teach really do make a difference. And I'll close with 5 things that I've learned, my final 5 things that I've learned in life that I think are important. I call them the 5 basic rules of leadership. And again, going back to this organization that I've been so honored to be a part of all my life, most of my life, since I was 16, Skills USA. It's really what we try to do with every student that we encounter, and that's instill some of those leadership qualities. So the first rule of leadership, in my opinion, is knowledge. Be knowledgeable of your subject matter. I know there are training experts, welding experts, all kinds of experts sitting in this room. But constantly seek new knowledge. Be knowledgeable of your organization. Be knowledgeable of your team, everyone that you lead. Know all you can know about your mission, your vision, and the values that drive your organization, the products and processes involved, and never stop learning. We constantly hear about continuous education, and it's important. If you're asked a question and you don't possess the knowledge to know the answer, you always, the wisest leaders in history always have, know that they can never know everything and just state, I'll find that answer for you. So, spend that time, be knowledgeable. The next rule is judgment. Once you have that knowledge when leading others, always use good judgment. A leader's decision should be based on knowledge and all that you have available to you and all you can gain from other sources. Bad decisions are normally snap decisions. They're decisions you make quickly. They haven't been well thought out. So seek the opinions of other leaders, those that you respect, and always exercise due process. And that's where so many of us get in trouble sometimes, by snapping to a decision without giving the other person due process. Hear both sides of the story always, because that's the only way you can render a final decision and use good judgment. The third rule is dependability. A good leader is dependable. And that not only means showing up on time, being there on time for every task when you're expected to be there. It also means when you make a promise, make sure you fulfill that promise. People depend on you as a leader to make sure you're promising, when you're promising, that you're carrying out the promise that you've made. So if you promise to deliver something, be sure you do it as promised and be sure you do it on time. If extenuating circumstances prevent you from fulfilling your commitment, the team should be fully informed. The team should know this is going to be postponed. We don't have the information we need yet to make that judgment decision. The fourth rule, and probably one of the most important, one of the toughest actually, to master, if any of us ever could actually master it, and that's tact. A good leader is tactful. You know, never say anything that might upset or insult or embarrass anyone, particularly in public. If a leader uses any off-color comments, jokes, or offensive language, it really creates a dying of that respect that people have for you. So again, it's about lifting people up. And when a dispute, and there's so many of those happening in the national press right now, when there's a he said, she said issue, a tactful leader will have face-to-face individual conversations in private with every person involved and analyze that situation before it escalates to something much bigger than it should be. And being tactful also means respecting all perspectives, being fully tolerant of the diversity and the differences of all people. And finally, my fifth rule, and I think it is probably the one that will carry us through when others won't, that's enthusiasm. Always be enthusiastic about everything you do. Someone who carries enthusiasm, people know it. They know when you're excited about something, when you have enthusiasm, it shows in your body language, it shows in your eyes. It really shows up when you're enthusiastic about what you're doing. So if you're enthusiastic about a task, like Brad was in London, you're going to be successful. Be enthusiastic above all else. It'll pay high dividends to the leader and everyone who surrounds you. So it's important, this leadership aspect, going back to the beginning of this lecture. The workforce in this nation and around this world is dependent on high skills. As we go forward in the 21st century, the workforce of tomorrow, and it's starting right now, today, has to be well-trained, well-qualified, and again, going backwards a moment, before Brad went to London, talking about qualification, we had a beautiful article in Parade magazine on Labor Day Sunday, and it was the issue on what Americans earn, the wages of certain level of positions across this country. And Parade magazine knew that Brad and his 16 other student member team were headed to London in a few weeks, the first week of October, and on Labor Day Sunday they ran a feature article about Brad and the team. And one of the one of the banners on the article in Parade magazine, both online and in print, was that there were 450,000 jobs unfilled today because of the lack of necessary talent. So again, this idea of technical skills, and we're seeing so much technology and so much upstairs on the trade show floor that just sort of wakes us up sometimes to let us realize what is out there and what kind of new technology we need to be constantly learning, and that continuous education piece that we need to be engaged in. But never forget that issue of employability and what worldwide employers are saying, the most important issue to them right now today, and it has been going back to the skills gap shortage of 2001 to the National Association of Manufacturers, the largest issue they have are people coming to them asking for work with a lack of basic employability skills. And that's why I wanted to touch on leadership today and some of those things that do make a difference as we go through life and we lead other people and try to help build people and build companies, build teams, and build success. Because so much of it depends on this work that we do each and every day with one another, as much or more than it depends on that technology that you see upstairs on the floor. It's all important. It all has to work together. But without solid leaders, without people coming into the workforce with solid employability skills, character, work ethic, time management has to be understood. That was one of the big issues cited in the report, was timeliness, showing up to work on time. It involves understanding cultural diversity in the workplace. It involves communication. I can tell you that working with corporate America and sitting at board tables in corporate headquarters with executives, everyone that I've seen from John McGlade at Air Products to the GM CEO to Jim Lentz from Toyota, they all share some very common characteristics. And a lot of it has to do with their ability to communicate effectively, face-to-face, around the team table, on their keyboard, in writing, and it makes a huge difference to anyone who has solid communication skills. Again, that's what we try to make sure students understand. And another thing that you may be surprised to learn that we do in Skills USA, we have a 7-part program of work. It involves things like professional development. And we have a solid professional development curriculum that students can formalize their professional education with those things I talked about, like teamwork and time management and understanding cultural diversity in the workplace. We also have a part of our program that involves community service, because particularly this generation of students, they want to give back to the community. They want to make a difference in the world. And another part of our program is actually social activities. Why would you think we want students to understand the importance of social activities? Anyone have any idea? When I talk about those executives around the tables in boardrooms, most of the decisions in corporate America aren't made at mahogany tables on the penthouse floor of a boardroom. They're made on the golf course. They're made at a party, a cocktail party. They're made at a birthday party for employees or a celebration, some kind of social activity. So we need to make sure that our young people understand that. And finally, as we talk about this program, we have a vision, a long-range vision in Skills USA called Vision 2020. And it's where we will be in the year 2020. And 2020 is perfect vision. So we worked with some of our corporate friends, particularly with Caterpillar Corporation, to develop this vision for our organization in the future. So my board that meets tomorrow in St. Louis charged me with getting this vision together. So I asked some of our corporate partners if they would help. We do solid strategic planning, 1 to 2 years at a time, but it's been a long time since we've done a long-range vision. So there's a gentleman at Caterpillar Corporation in Peoria. His name is Steve Pierce, and he's a black belt Six Sigma employee, and he helps with worldwide strategic planning for Caterpillar. So I flew up to Peoria to pick his brain, to sort of ask him what I needed to do to start gathering information to develop this long-range vision. So when I flew up there to meet him, one of the greatest guys in the world, I expected to have to sit down and go through a day-long exercise of scientific data collection, of making sure that I had every survey instrument scientifically researched and making sure that everything was in place to gather the information we needed for this long-range vision. But Steve had a different answer. He said, no, Tim, you need to ask 2 questions. You need to ask the students in your organization, and you need to ask the teachers in your organization 2 questions. Number 1, what brings you joy? Number 2, what keeps you up at night? What really is concerning you? What's on your mind? And we did. We asked that question of students, I think in 46 states around the country, and teachers. And you'll be surprised at some of the things that the students said. One thing came out, and for those of you that work with employees and work with training, this is really important to know. The thing that came out, some of the things that came out from the students' answer, what brings you joy? Music, friends, family, worship, religion, and God. Surprising from this generation to hear that come out in the survey. And what brings them joy? Number 1 answer, doing something for others and expecting nothing in return, providing service. We asked the teachers that question, what brings them joy? Seeing it when the light comes on with the student, knowing when they really get it. Some of their concerns were students not understanding the consequences of their actions. And really, the influx of media and technology and how teachers were dealing with that. But going back to the other question, what keeps you up at night? Students said they worried about death. We all do, we all have, particularly when you're young. They worried about losing someone close to them, a family member, to death or to illness. They worried, number 1, above all else. Well, let me go back to before the number 1 answer. They worried about college and continuing education, whether they could afford it, whether they would have the means to do that. But the number 1 answer, and what kept them up at night, will I leave the world a better place? So those 2 really dovetailed from the answer of what brings you joy, doing something for others. What worries you, whether I'll leave the world a better place, was really telling to us. So what we're trying to do as an organization to meet that is to provide more service opportunities. We just released a curriculum called Champions Serving Others, which allows students to plan their own service projects with their teachers' guidance and to conduct those projects in their communities to try to leave the world a better place, more sustainability, more green issues, and those kinds of things. And we're constantly developing programs, even music. When they said music brought them joy, we've developed a theme song for our organization. There's a hip-hop version, there's a country version, there's a rock version, there's a Bob Seger version, and they're online and they're on iTunes now. So again, it's going back to that issue of being a leader and trying to meet the needs, finding out, asking that simple question, you know, what brings you joy? As I asked those employees on the line, how are you doing? How's your family? You know, tell me a little about your work. It's all about that relationship, and life is really all about relationships. So it's been an honor to speak with you today. I think I'm going to let you out of here a little early.